Hello and welcome to Tigers by the Fire, a podcast out of Holy Cross High School about World War II discussions and stories. Today with me are Dalton Osborne.
Hey, what's going on?
And Joey Jones.
Hello.
And they're going to be talking to you about Nazi and, Axis propaganda. So this is a topic that I think is pretty interesting. It's one that really gives you the basis for a lot of the events that go on in World War II. And I'm going to kind of turn it over to you guys and let you guys kind of lead us off. But before we do, why did you guys choose this topic of propaganda?
It was something interesting that I thought that I didn't know too much about and wanted to research into it a bit more and broaden my knowledge on it.
I always like how looking from the enemy's perspective, because everyone always usually looks from the Allies' perspective, the winners. I want to see what the enemies thought during the war.
Yeah, and I think, too, what's really interesting is you can kind of figure out how the war is going to play out, at least how certain sides are going to treat other sides in the war. Through the use of propaganda, as we see with Japan, and then also with the Germans and the propaganda they have against, especially the people in the East, like the Soviets. But let's start off on your first couple of points. So who's going to lead off?
Propaganda pertaining to the war machine is something very important, and it's one of the key factors as to why the Nazis and the Japanese had such large success in multiple battles. Propaganda is something that can really drive the country into one specific point and be able to focus all attention on something and really make sure that they can kind of like get everybody behind one thing so they can work at maximum, maximum 100%.
Yeah, I think, to define propaganda is essentially any type of media publication for the state. And I think what a lot of people don't always realize that propaganda happens on all sides, especially in war. And it happens today. It happened back then. It's not a new thing, but it's something that every government really, since governments have been around, have used to, like you're saying, Dalton, sway public opinion into some direction that they want.
Yeah, it boosts soldier morale, and also it lets them kind of they don't feel as bad for committing the atrocities and things that they do, because they think it's okay. It's for this cause. It's like we're ridding Europe of the Jews that are like a cancer on our pure German state, or the Chinese have always been attacking us from this point, and it's finally time to get rid of them. And it's okay if we don't treat them as other humans. It's all right. It doesn't matter. It's what's the purpose of the war. It's okay.
Yeah, and to that point, the propaganda of both the Nazis and the Japanese fester into their education programs, their pop culture, radio, newspaper, billboards, the whole kind of 9 yards. And it does, desensitize some people to some of the actions that will make the Second World War what it eventually becomes.
Yeah, it encourages, like I said, it was encouraging the people at the home front to make sure that they always were working in factories, getting out, making different supplies for the war effort. It also made sure that people were always, it gives it a nationalistic sense. They always made sure more soldiers were coming into the army. And it also mainly instilled fear into the enemies, and why they should understand this is who we are and what we're going to do to you if you don't stop us.
Yeah, and all sides had that workers' propaganda. The United States, I know most people are familiar with Rosie the Riveter, right? It's a big propaganda kind of thing, or Uncle Sam wants you, that type of thing. So I think we're starting off with the Nazis, correct?
Oh, yes, we are. The first Axis power we're going to start talking about propaganda would be the Nazis. Before the Nazis even gained power, propaganda was very important to their cause, because the propaganda was there to inform the people that they are a thing that is running for government. It got people to become interested in their ideals. They needed people to understand what they were running for, why they were running. It's just like political campaigns they've had now. They needed to get their message out there, and they need to get to the fact that they were trying to get power out there. One of these that was very important was Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf was the whole entire book that Hitler wrote during his time in jail. And it really helped people to understand what the Nazis were pushing for.
Yeah, when Hitler writes Mein Kampf following the beer hall push, it in some ways solidifies what the Nazi Party is all about. He is really, I think, creating an ideological threshold that was not previously there. And so, to your point, that book is going to be edited by the party eventually, and it gets reproduced in a number of different fashions depending on the year we're in, which makes it kind of interesting. But you're right, the Nazis utilized propaganda in the 20s and early 30s in this election period of German history.
Propaganda allows the party to centralize their ideas and not to have it as something that's kind of out there for interpretation. It allows people to know what the party stands for exactly. And they did this through many means. One of the means was Mein Kampf, as in books, literature. They wrote a bunch of books about this. They also wrote and filmed many movies. Heimkehr and Jutsus were just two of the movies. They also had a movie based off of the Olympics in Berlin. They also staged outlets like the Polish border incident that called the Glow-Whites incident to kind of give a reason to the whole invading Germany part. And posters, like we've all seen, and many other things like newspapers and Der Stürmer was a newspaper to further their cause. And one of the main people that really would write a lot of these movies, especially that was like their main go-to, the Nazis, was Leni Riefenstahl. She wrote many movies, and she was a very big propagandist for the Nazi party. And once when the Nazis got into power, this was also very important because it helped people to ease into their radical ideas. Once when they got into, when they were trying to get power, they weren't so radical yet. But once when they got power, they started to make their propaganda a little bit more radical as it went on. And that would make the people start following their more radical ideas as the government started to get more radical and radical.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Joey. I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people do not realize that, one, it's a day or an age where you don't have the mass communication you have today. So they can campaign in different parts of Germany on different measurables, right? If there's a big anti-Semitic contingent, they're going to be anti-Semitic. If there's not, they downplay that part of the party. And so the Nazi party, at its base, it tries to institute like family values and, bringing Germany back from the Depression, all these other things, because their Depression was in the 20s, obviously. But they utilize this whole propaganda imagery to showcase that. But once they become the party of power, then they are going to dominate the radio waves, right? And they're going to dominate all newspapers. It's one of the first steps they take when they finally get into power in 1933.
They take over in every way, especially education. Mm-hmm. Education was a very big thing for propaganda because they would teach people from their youngest age that the Jewish people were a stain on the earth in their mind, in their eyes. And then that was able to ease the people in instead of just dropping the Holocaust right on them, right at there, because they would not accept it. But if you ease them into it, they would eventually accept it.
Yeah, you look at like an event like the Night of the Broken Glass. Yeah. That's really instituted. There's an assassination, obviously, of a German minister in France. But the radio broadcast by Goebbels and then subsequently things that Himmler did as well invigorate the populace and inflame the situation to the point where the people start to, destroy all the, Jewish businesses and synagogues and everything else. Assisted by the SS, of course, but still, it's a propaganda-driven event. And yeah, you're right. Schools in particular are really important in the Nazi fascist regime because they're going to have the schools teach the racial ideologies and everything else. So, no, those are very good points.
Yeah, like you were saying, the racial view and point of the Nazi Party was so large in its propaganda. That was the main kind of driving ideal that they always pushed for, during war, because it was always either the Jews or the Bolsheviks or the Slavs, or just anything that wasn't pure German just needed to be eradicated, and that's why they were able to go on and commit these atrocities. The propaganda was so widespread and correct and fully indoctrinated in them, just like Joey was saying, from the education at a young age and just how much they were able to really brainwash them into thinking all these things.
Yeah, and that's one of the points. We've talked about this in class before that, in 1933, when they take over, they reform the education system, and that's one of the first things they do. and they're going to put in eugenics. They're going to put in very anti-French and anti-Soviet teachings, though some of this stuff isn't exactly different from anything that France would have had or England would have had. But they take it to an extreme sense, and because they do that, that 10-year-old in 1940 or 1933 is now 20 in 1943, right? And he's in the Wehrmacht or he's in the SS, and he's been educated in a way that has created a radical, as you're saying. So I think that's a very, astute point that you guys made.
And this is nothing new. Like, this was being done like all the way back in Napoleon's time. Like, he was like one of the first people to do this, and it's something that's like always been done. And I think we don't really realize that.
Yeah, I mean, Napoleon, when he was in charge of France, they would have the kids at school. They would basically pledge allegiance to Napoleon in France, and so they link. And that's a big thing that Hitler did too. Is linking the state to the man becomes a very big, I think, vital part of Nazism. Is to be German is to be a Nazi is to love Hitler, and so vice versa.
Right. And another thing they were able to do with propaganda, and like the Jews specifically, is that since the Allies and other countries that they were fighting against were protecting them and also downplaying their propaganda and the fact that like they're not like a subhuman, they're the same as us. They're not wrong. They didn't do anything wrong. The Germans are also able to campaign on that fact that they were protecting the Jewish people from them, and that they also needed to be eradicated because they were opposing their ideals.
Yeah, no, very good point. I think people sometimes forget how this whole process plays out and how people can be manipulated in everything by everything they see. And it's not just the one picture. There's no one propaganda piece that changes everything.
Yeah.
It's a constant barrage of these thoughts.
Another really big reason, going off of the Western powers, they wanted to fool the Western powers into thinking something else than what they were actually doing. Because one of the main reasons, one of the things that the Americans and the Europeans did not really know, they knew that the Holocaust was happening, but not to the extent that it was happening. And they tried to play it off. And one thing they did was there was a labor camp, Theresienstadt, where the International Red Cross Committee wanted to come and visit to see the conditions of the labor camp. Mm-hmm. So they invited them in. But before the Red Cross came, they cleaned up the camp. They made everything look good. They staged a banquet with a performance to show as a propaganda piece towards the Red Cross, to where people are like, they're in a camp. They're not at their homes, but they are having a good time. They are not suffering like they are in the other camps. They use this to fool the Allies powers.
Yeah, and we see that a lot. And I mean, they use it in elections too, as you guys were saying. I know you guys have some stuff in here about they had imagery of the German ideal family, right? And what was the view they would try and portray for women in this society?
It was that they should stay home, take care of the family, and manage the family's welfare, so the man can go out, focus on his work for making money and provide for them, while the woman's like behind the scenes, is making sure everything's going all right and staying there.
Yeah, and the imagery they always show are men working in factories, yes. And the idea that you're going to have one job can kind of spur you on for your family. And I think that's an important thing. That's what got them elected, to be honest. Yeah. But for the war, I know you guys said they staged a Polish aggression on the German border. What can you tell me about that?
So when they were wanting to invade Poland, this was like the final straw for Britain and France to join the war. They knew that if they were going to do this, they needed a reason to invade Poland. So what they did was they staged a attack at a German customs house where the Polish, they dressed up some people. They killed them. They put them in Polish uniform, and they also put people in German uniforms. They killed them, and they placed them out to make it seem like a Polish militia attacked this area, so they would have a reason to fight Poland and to invade Poland for this act of violence against the German people.
Yeah, and these were, I think, people who were already imprisoned. I think some were from Czechoslovakia, some were interned at Dachau, and they bring them off to the border and stage this fight, and that, of course, gets the German people all riled up. And of course, September 1, we know what happens after that. I know during the war, their propaganda is the same as you see in almost every other country, right? It's anti whoever. I know they pay special attention to the Soviets. And I know we talked about, in class, propaganda would go into the army about 3 months before they would invade either Poland or the Soviet Union in 1941. And it would kind of tell them that they were going to be shot at by civilians. And this was to encourage them to, subsequently kill civilians in those invasions.
Yeah, it was like an excuse, or like a almost not so much an order, but like a incentive to commit war crimes and hurt the enemy, even though it was like a justification for war crimes. They were able to convince their soldiers who might not have wanted to willingly kill civilians, but the moment they thought to themselves that they were in danger and they could die from them, they thought, oh well, it's me against them. I need to put my life first before them, and so it's all right to kill them.
And I think that is kind of interesting because Germany had rules against shooting civilians. The German army in the Wehrmacht has specific rules against it. And then about halfway through the invasion of Poland, Hitler declares that all soldiers who may or may not have committed atrocities are granted amnesty, right?
Yeah.
And then to go one step further, when they invade the Soviet Union, they just, as we saw, we watched something on that, I think, last class, they just straight up take it away. They're like, you can kill civilians.
Yeah, right. It's almost like an order at that point.
Yeah.
They ease them into it, just like a lot of different propaganda that we see throughout all of the Nazis' regime and their party. Their campaigning, they always have done that.
The Nazi propaganda was not so stagnant. It wasn't focused on one thing. It was focused on many different things. Like, per se, when they were trying to get in power, it was the German ideas, the Workers' Party, and then it changed eventually into easing people into the Jewish ideologies that they had. And then eventually, once when they got to the Russian side of the war, it was against Russian. And once when they started to lose the war after Stalingrad, it started to push back. We need you to come help us fight against the Russians so we don't lose this war. It was a very fluent thing that Joseph Goebbels was at the head of.
Yeah, and Goebbels is a terrifying individual, but a very brilliant one when it comes to propaganda. He does the best job, I think, of anyone else in the war. And you're right. The Germans have a very complex propaganda machine because it's never just one thing. There are multiple avenues. I mean, think about it. They have to break the Versailles Treaty. So that's a big propaganda thing that has to go out there. Why is this good? Taking Czechoslovakia, that had to be propaganda, right? You had to justify this in certain ways. And so all that is important. I mean, I know they had a program very akin to FDR. When they did the REA, the Rural Electrification Program, they gave out radios to small farmers who signed contracts and everything. Well, in Nazi Germany, they did the same thing. You could get a free radio, but that radio is given to you for what? To hear Joseph Goebbels and then Hitler if he talks on the radio, which Goebbels talked way more than Hitler. They also gave people a photo of Hitler for free. And I mean, so it's kind of interesting to think about that. I mean, we haven't seen anything quite that scale in the U.S. in a long time, but
moving on to Japan's version of propaganda, it was very similar to the Nazis, but also had slight differentiations. Also same as the Nazis' propaganda machine. It was mainly focused on racial ideologies and why that Japan is also the super race and everyone else is subhuman to them, and they did a lot of their campaigning and justification for their military excursions and war crimes because of that point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Americans don't always realize how brutal Japan was to China and to the Philippines and Malaysia. Really, anywhere that they conquered, they treated the people as subhuman. They treated them very poorly. I know in a previous podcast last year, we outlined the medical experiments that the Japanese did to Chinese civilians. You're talking, live dissections and things of that nature. It's really horrifying. But you're right. Similarly, they use racial superiority as their main kind of propaganda tool.
Yeah, some of the differences though is that they did it to not so much only their own country. They also did a lot of outwards and attacking propaganda, not so much just to boost morale, but to also incite different conflicts in different countries.
Yeah, and we actually do see that. I think all across the Nazis were infamous for broadcasting propaganda into the American lines via radio, and then in particular to African American soldiers. And we see the Japanese, as I know you guys, I think I probably had it in here, is they urged people to overthrow the colonizers.
Yeah.
That's a big thing, right? Is that, you have Britain and France who colonized all these people. And so in Indochina, Vietnam, or in India, there's a lot of unhappy people with the British and the French as well. They're not exactly the good guys in those countries. So, I mean, that's a big part of their propaganda as well.
Speaking to the point in India, they would army airplanes to flying in circles around on above India to drop leaflets down to the Indian people to show them what the British are doing to them, to show them how they are destroying their economy, how they are massacring their people. They wanted the people to turn against their colonizers so they could join the war effort for the Japanese. But the Indian population did not know that the Japanese would probably be doing worse things to them when they would take over.
And so that's where dual propaganda comes in, because the British are telling the Indians the exact same thing. Hey, if you submit to these guys, especially in the Burma campaign, well, they're going to massacre you. Here are 5 incidents of massacres that they've done.
Yeah.
And so that's the same problem that the Germans ran into when they invaded the Soviet Union, is they should have had allies in this, but they massacred whole towns. And so now all of a sudden, everyone in Belarus hates the Germans and everyone in the Ukraine hates the Germans. And so for the Japanese, it's the same thing. You commit atrocities in Malaysia and it gets back. And then so the people in Burma are like, well, we're not going to do that. You're just going to do the same thing to us.
Yeah.
And I think that's where these countries, especially with the racial superiority things, it backfires militarily, ultimately, I think, at the end.
And this wasn't also just towards India. They also gave it to the Australians as well, because the Americans were fighting from Australia. That was their main point, because that was the only part left in that area that was not taken over by the Japanese. And it was being attacked by the Japanese as well. So there was this riot kind of between the two people, the Americans and the Australians, in Brisbane, and they tried to use that against the Australians. They tried to use the reason why the Americans were there. They tried to make the Australians submit to the Japanese and not fight with the American soldiers, but to fight against the American soldiers. And they also did this in the Philippines when they were trying to take over and eventually take over the Philippines. They wanted the people to fight against imperialism and to fight against the atrocities that the Americans have committed in the Philippines.
Yeah, in some cases it does work. I mean, they do get loyalists on local levels, but by and large, I think the treatment of Filipino soldiers who were captured really sours at that. And the Philippine resistance is actually one of the best resistances of the war in any theater.
Yeah.
It's a very well put together resistance. And, to your point, the Australian thing, I mean, you talk about Australia, New Zealand, these places, Japan is almost, they're getting right to the edge of their borders, or their waters at least. And we forget that there's a lot of hostility in these places from World War I, where they felt like the British essentially lined them up and had them massacred for British units to then do flanking maneuvers or get in tanks. And so there is some hostility toward the Allied powers.
The harp on that point as well, the Japanese used a tactic of saying that especially for the Philippines, this was a big thing for the Philippines, was that the Americans were waiting back, making the Philippine army take the brunt of the decision to make them that they are taking the worst. They are all the ones that are dying, and then the Americans come in afterwards to clean up and make them look like the victors, when actually the people who put in the hard work were the Philippines.
Yeah, and again, it's a very common tactic, and it's one that sometimes has a lot of validity to it. We don't always like to say that, but sometimes it does. It has some validity that, these, especially the British and French, and then even the Americans, they put the foreign legions first and let them kind of go down, and then they bring in their own troops.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of the propaganda in India, because looking at some of them, it was yeah, I mean, there's nothing really wrong with what I see. There's a bunch of pictures and paintings of Winston Churchill treating Indians as slaves, and just really just destroying their economy for the betterment of the England Empire. And that's how they saw it. But at the same time, they realized there's nothing we can do, because if if we let the Japanese in, it's possible. They were never sure that, like, just because the Japanese, like, they want to destroy England, they could just be their new empire. Because that's what they were. That's what the Japanese were. They were also an empire trying to colonize the whole of the Pacific. So it was like they were in an awful situation where they couldn't really pick one side.
Yeah, and I think by that point too, India is gradually getting more and more political autonomy from Britain following World War One. But Churchill, I mean, as another member of our class, Jackson, when he talks, will tell you, Churchill is not exactly the nicest person to any of the colonized territories. He's an elitist. He's, I think, in a modern contemporary time, pretty racist when it comes down to these colonies. And so, I mean, that's a pretty easy, I think, propaganda piece for them. But you're right. I think ultimately in India, they didn't think it would be any better with the other people because the other side's not saying, hey, just go be independent. It's saying, hey, let us come in.
Yeah.
Which is a whole different story.
Right. Yeah. So all in all, I think the just the way the propaganda worked is just both countries did this. They would educate children from a young age and make sure that they understood the ideal of superior races and that they didn't have to worry about killing other races because it was all right because they weren't human and the supreme race rules above all and that's the only one that should exist. And they also blamed different atrocities from the West and used those as like true points, but also like for an evil reason. So it's like a almost bittersweet. It's like, yeah, you're telling one point of truth, but you're only doing it so you can do the same thing to us.
Right. The most believable lies always come from a little inkling of truth.
Right.
But I think when you look at the Japanese propaganda, and I'm glad you brought that up, like from an education standpoint, they're taught one thing. And then you get the media barrage. So you fast forward into the war, you get to 1944 with the Battle of Saipan. And then a year later with the Battle of Okinawa. Both of these battles are on Japanese islands that are inhabited by Japanese citizens. And what U.S. soldiers, as we talked about last year in U.S. history, but we'll talk about way more in depth this year in our World War II class. But what the American soldiers found when they get to some of these villages is mass suicides.
Yeah.
And those mass suicides happened because they were told that Americans were going to rape their women and children and sell them into slavery. And so they went into mass suicides. Where you have people who would wade out into the water until they got taken by the sea, people jumping off of cliffs. They had people taking grenades and killing each other with them. It's horrible scenarios. And it really shocked American GIs to see that. And it was really one of the shocking points that a lot of people say leads to the decision to drop the atomic bomb is that you're going to have a whole island of people filled with propaganda, that it's better to die than be captured. And so what would happen village after village, city after city to the civilian population in a landed invasion of Japan?
Yeah. And some people would honestly think that maybe like, hey, like, I understand like they did the same thing. It's like they pillaged and raped and killed the other villages, but like why would they think that the Americans would do that? Like they're the good guys, so to speak. But I mean, they did the exact same thing. So of course they would think, oh, we did it to them. Why wouldn't they do it to us? So it's like this is the only way out.
Yeah, and no one ever thinks they're the bad guy. Right?
Yeah.
The Japanese people believe that they are, fighting the good fight, right? They're expanding their empire. They need this. The Germans, when they go into Poland, this is about getting farmland. When they go into the Soviet Union, right, they're stopping the spread of Bolshevikism. They're trying to get into farmland. And I think it really does speak to the level that this propaganda goes at, which is why you see, like we said, mass suicides or the Germans holding out for as long as they did.
Right.
Because by 1944, Germany is just being bombed to oblivion.
Right. Yeah.
And Japan has the same thing happen to it. Fire bombings of Tokyo in early 45 are horrendous, killing 500,000 people. So it's, horrible situations.
Yeah. And I think that's right about it. You have anything else to add, Joey?
I don't think I have anything else. You hit most of the main points that we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was a good topic, guys. I thought overall, like the thing of propaganda, and then obviously we can go into more things, and if another group wants to do allied propaganda, we can go into that as well.
Yeah.
But there are lots of different resources if you want to see various things of propaganda. The U.S. Holocaust Museum has a little part of their website that it really showcases that propaganda from the Nazis, and it does a good job of it. So if you really are interested in that, I would go to their website, and you could find some pretty good things there. But until next time, this was Tigers by the Fire. Thank you guys for listening.